Nikki Lowe, and welcome to the Wisdom for Working Mums podcast show, where I share insights and interviews that support women to combine their family, work and life in a more successful and sustainable way. Welcome to this episode. I'm your host, Nikki Lowe, and today I'm talking about needs. As working mums, if we want to thrive, it's vital that we know what our needs are and take intentional action to get them met. Our well-being is so closely tied to having our needs met. And it's common sense that if we're going to be happier if we're getting enough food, water and sleep versus being kind of hungry, thirsty and tired. And the same is true for our psychological needs. But how do we know what our needs are in any given moment? And that's what we're going to be exploring in today's episode. We're going to be looking at what are needs and the 4 different types, why they're so important, and actually 4 steps to identifying your needs and getting them met. But before we dive in, I'd like to do a listener shout out, and I'd like to thank you, Z.Letz, I hope I've said that right, whose handle's on Apple Podcasts. He's based in Germany, and you say that it's absolutely brilliant, thoughtful, and most importantly, relevant. If you are a busy mum and only do one thing for yourself this year, it should be listening to these podcasts. So thank you, Z.Letz. That genuinely means the world to me, to not only hear that feedback, but I really appreciate you taking the time to do it. As I've said before, you'll have heard me say on this podcast before, it gets lonely in podcast world. I never know who's listening and what impact these podcasts are having. So thank you. And if you're listening to this and you've not yet left a review, it would be amazing if you did. You can just head over to iTunes or your favourite podcast platform and leave one there. Not only does it help me to continue to create really useful and relevant episodes for you, it also helps more working mums like you to benefit from the show, because the more the reviews the show has, the higher it gets in the ranking, so more people get to see it. So now I'd like to go back to needs. What I notice in my work is that actually this is an area that my clients have the biggest impact with, because it's such a fundamental foundation for what we need in place to thrive, and its impact is always so positive. So that's why I wanted to create this episode for you today. But it's worth starting with what actually are needs. So I'd like to just spend a few minutes defining what we mean by this. So your needs are the things that help you feel grounded and well. And without them, you tend to feel irritable, depleted, unhealthy, or even unsafe and unwell. And actually, I think as women, we're not on the whole very good at identifying our needs. And I love that what Glennon Doyle says about we actually forget how to know what we need when we learned how to please. And you may have heard me talk before on this podcast that actually if you're somebody that has a strong people-pleasing drive, it's a high probability that you're not very good at either identifying or meeting your needs. And so this podcast is really for you if you can resonate with that. And I think particularly when we become mums, the model of motherhood that tends to be kind of celebrated in culture and society is about being selfless and really sacrificing ourselves in the name of our children. And Glennon Doyle has this amazing quote from her book Untamed, which says, "Mothers have martyred themselves in the name of their children since the beginning of time. We have lived as if she who disappears the most loves the most. We have been conditioned to prove our love by slowly ceasing to exist. And what a terrible burden for children to bear, to know that they are the reason their mother stopped living. And this is why Jung suggested there's no greater burden on a child than the unlived life of a parent." And I remember when I read that in her book, it kind of just hit me in the heart, because I know on my own journey, when I first became a mum, one of the things that absolutely contributed to my adrenal fatigue and me burning out was not recognizing my own needs, and if I did, not giving myself permission to meet them. And that's why I think this topic is so important. And I think it's really important to say that actually needs are different to our desires or wants. Our needs are actually a fundamental necessity, and it's really what's necessary for you to function and be able to perform all the roles that you have in life. They're the things that help you feel centered, kind of powerful and well. And our desires are kind of the cherry on the cake. They're really things that you might like and enjoy, but without them, they won't cause you any discomfort or concern. And I think it's also important to say that your needs are unique to you, and they shouldn't be compared or judged against anyone else. And many of you may have come across something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's often a model that is used in a business context, but particularly in a psychology context. And I remember learning about this probably about 25 years ago when I was at university doing my degree, and I kind of majored in organisational behaviour, and I remember learning this model. And even with the knowledge of this model, it never ever occurred to me to apply it to myself, and particularly apply it to myself in motherhood. So if you've come across the model, it basically is a 5-tier model that talks about human needs, and it's normally depicted as a hierarchical model in a pyramid, and the lower levels are bigger and need more attention, and as you go up the levels, it goes into the point at the top of the pyramid, and the lower level needs must be satisfied before you can kind of attend to the higher level needs. And in this, Maslow talks about, the basic fundamental foundation of the pyramid is our physiological needs. So almost our basic biological needs. So things like air, food, drink, shelter, sleep, and even sex as a biological need. And once those needs are met, that we can move to the next level, which he talked about being safety. And what he meant by that was really about how much we need kind of order and predictability and control. And it could be around our own health and safety, but also around kind of psychological safety. And that's why in kind of family and society is so important to us. So things like, the police keeping us, that psychological sense of we've got somebody keeping us safe. Schools for the predictability, and many of us will have known, over lockdown, how not having the school routine actually impacted our lives hugely, and things like hospitals. And once that safety need is met, the next level up is around love and belonging. So things like friendship, intimacy, trust and acceptance, and why kind of belonging in groups, so either friendship groups or other groups, is kind of a fundamental need for us as humans. And once that's needs in place, Maslow talked about the next level was esteem. And what he meant here was really two aspects of this. So there's esteem for ourselves, which is about, our dignity, feeling of mastery and independence in what we do in our lives, but also esteem from others. So having that sense that you're respected and that your reputation is positive and that you've got some status. And then at the very top of this pyramid is something called self-actualization, which is a term that you might be familiar with when it comes to Maslow's hierarchy of need, which he talked about was ultimately about realizing our potential and self-fulfillment. And actually, I think in society we hear a lot about, be the best that you can be, and we've got to reach our potential and be the kind of mother that we want to be. But we're not actually encouraged, I think, as women and as mothers, to look at those lower level needs. And until they're met, we can't focus on those higher order needs. And so what I wanted to do today was, in this podcast, start to explore some of the foundations that the lower level needs build upon, so that we can ultimately thrive and have that kind of self-actualization. And I think why this is so important is there's a professor of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania called Seth Gilligan, and he talks about when we're good at recognizing and attending to our own needs, we also tend to be more emotionally stable. We tend to have less fear of missing out, so that FOMO, because when we know what we need, we can focus on that and almost not worry about what everybody else is doing and whether we're missing out on all that other stuff. And ultimately, it helps us feel more secure in our relationships. And I think with this, it's knowing that actually, if we are well as mothers and attend to our own needs, our families tend to be more healthy and vibrant. And if our families are healthy and vibrant, then society tends to be more healthy and vibrant. So paying attention to our own needs is vital for not only our own well-being, but I think a wider well-being in our families and society at large. So I wanted to share with you really the different levels of needs that we can have. Without our needs being met, we're actually not okay. We're operating from a place of depletion. And when we get our needs met, we can feel okay. And this is ultimately what we're talking about here. This isn't about, jumping from the rooftop and saying we're amazing. Our needs just mean that we feel okay. And I think for a lot of mothers, we tend to be giving out, so caring for others, attending to others' needs before we attend to our own, which means that we're always giving from a place of sacrifice. And that model is just not sustainable. That leads to depletion. So over a long period of time, that's what leads us to burnout and ultimately can impact our health. And as you've known from my own story, you've listened to this podcast before, that's ultimately what happened to me with my first child. And it was only through that experience that I was forced to look at my own needs. And actually, my needs up until that point, I hadn't recognised as needs. I thought they were almost desires and wants. So I kept ignoring them or dismissing them. And really, once we can get our needs met and we feel okay, that's when we're able to be generous. That's when, our cup is full up and then we can overflow and give to others. But most of us are giving from an empty or a nearing empty cup. And if we think about it as like a bank account, we're constantly going into debt in order to give out to others without really building up our own bank account first. And so this is what this episode is about actually what do I need to be able to build my bank account up so that I can give, and I can give generously, but I can give sustainably. Because the other important aspect of this is if we don't get our fundamental needs met, often we'll flip to getting our desires met. But that means we can do it in often an unsustainable way or an unhealthy way. And so what that might look like is actually, if you've just had one of those days where you've not had a moment to think to yourself, you've kind of put everybody's needs before your own, and you get to the end of the day and you're just at your kind of end of your tether, that's when we might go for, right, I just need a glass of wine to unwind. But that glass of wine turns into a bottle of wine, or we start to emotionally eat. So rather than just having a bit of chocolate that makes us feel good, we'll eat the whole box of chocolates. And this is because we've not had our fundamental needs met. We're reaching out to our kind of desires and wants to fill that fundamental need. And it's almost like if you have a really delicious, nutritious meal, you will feel kind of full up and satiated. And so you might want something sweet at the end of the meal just to give you that kind of sweetness kick. But you won't want to gorge out on a load of kind of sugar and chocolate because you've got your fundamental nutrition needs met. And that's a really great analogy for thinking about the difference between our needs and our wants, because I think we live in a culture and society, and particularly over the last 6 months with COVID, because we've not had a lot of our fundamental needs met just from the circumstances we've been in. Many of us, and myself included, have probably reached to other ways to kind of feel like we're getting our needs met, but often those can be unhealthy or not as sustainable for us. So what I wanted to give you now was the 4 steps to start to think about, how do I identify my needs? And the first step is really remembering that we live in a culture that doesn't encourage us or reward us for recognising and meeting our own needs, particularly as mothers. And I go back to that point I made about we can believe that we have to sacrifice our own needs to be a good mum, that being selfless is kind of the model of mothering that we kind of admire. So the first step in this process is just simply acknowledging that as a human being, you have needs. These simple requirements that you need to function in the world, and it doesn't make you needy or weak. So the first step is acknowledging that you have the needs and knowing that meeting your needs allows you to be more powerful and have a greater impact in your life. And that might sound a really simple step, but actually that was quite a huge step for me. And when I'm working with my clients, that's almost the transformative step that has to be in place. The second step is really about needs awareness. So to begin with, this might be about just thinking about the different categories of needs you might have. So there's actually 4 different categories at a high level. The first one is your physical needs, and these are often the most obvious, which are around sleep, food, and water, movement. Not exercise, but movement, because sometimes as mums, we might not have the energy and resources within us to really exercise in the way that society wants us to, but our bodies do need some form of movement. Shelter, and the need to feel safe. So, as I say, these physical needs are often the most obvious, but sometimes they're the ones that can get overlooked still. So clearly sleep, when you're a mother, tends to get compromised. And how many of us, when we've had like newborn babies, have kind of focused on feeding the baby and got to the end of the day and thought, God, I've not eaten properly. And how many of you listening can relate to kind of sitting at your desk working away on the computer and really ignoring the need that you need the toilet till you get to the point where you're like, oh my God, I've got to run to the toilet. And I know that I can do that. So it's just this awareness that we have these needs and life can often get in the way of us paying attention to them. So the first level of needs is physical, then the psychological needs. So that could be needs like the need for alone time, the need to have a sense of accomplishment, the need for certainty, the need for variety and personal growth and learning. And again, I know that when I became a mum, one of the things that I struggled with the most wasn't the sleepless nights and the dirty nappies and the breastfeeding, which were all the things that I thought I was going to struggle with. Actually, the biggest struggle I had was no longer my time being my own, that I hadn't got the same degree of certainty and control over my time, and that I didn't get any alone time. And that actually, that those psychological needs I'd completely underestimated and overlooked for quite a long time into my mothering journey. The third level of needs is relationship needs, and this is a need for connection. So that can be physical or emotional. It could be time with your children, time with your friends, time with your loved ones, and kind of intimate time with your partner if you have one. And then the fourth level of needs is spiritual needs. And this isn't necessarily something that's got to be religious, but it could just be time in nature and time to connect with your purpose and meaning, and time to connect to your religion if you have one. And so when we're thinking about our needs, it can be really useful to think in terms of those 4 different areas: physical, psychological, relationship, and spiritual needs. And knowing that actually all those needs are valid. And you might be listening to this thinking, actually, I have probably put some of those in the wants or desire category rather than need. And I, on social media this week, shared that at the weekend I met up with 2 of my closest friends, and they live about 3 hours from me, and I'd not seen them since Christmas. So it turned out that with lockdown, we obviously had to cancel all the plans that we'd got, and it's been 9 months since I've seen them. And I'd organised to meet them at a halfway point, an hour and a half from where I live, which was the furthest I've travelled since kind of COVID hit. And actually just getting out the door to meet them was quite an effort, because both of my children had been used to being with them nearly 24/7. over the last 6 months. So as a result, they've both become quite clingy, which is understandable. So when I was trying to get out the door, actually, it really unsettled them. And I had my mother's guilt came to the surface, and I was like, oh, why am I doing this? Why am I unsettling them? I don't need to do this. Why don't I just take them with me? And all of these thoughts about, this is selfish of me. Why am I doing this? I could feel all that old stuff of mine that I thought that I'd worked through coming to the surface. And as my logical head knows that, it's work in progress. And I think, it's lifetime work as a mum, isn't it? Working through what comes to the surface. And what I had to remind myself in the moment was this wasn't just something that I wanted to do, that was just a nice to do. Actually, I hadn't connected with these friends for so long. It was a need. And once I'd had that lunch with them and I was back home ready for tea time with them and bath and bedtime, I was such a better mum for that. I felt full up with I felt fully nourished from kind of having that time connecting with my friends. But it was really easy for my mind to try and dismiss that into, oh, this is a nice to have, not a need to have. So let's go back. The first step is around remembering that we live in a culture that doesn't encourage us to get our needs met. The second step is this needs awareness. So focusing on what are the different levels of needs. So physical, psychological, relationship, and spiritual needs. And the third step then is around brainstorming your needs. And I would encourage you to, start just to build a list somewhere. It could be in a notepad, it could be in the notes app on your phone, wherever makes sense for you. And start to add to this list the things that help you feel okay. And a great way to do this is really just to bring a practice of mindfulness to your needs. And it can be as simple as just breathing with awareness in the moment and almost doing a body scan. So as you're listening to this, whether you're sitting or kind of walking around the kitchen or in the car, wherever you might be, just take a breath and scan your body almost from head down through your body to your toes. And the chances are you'll get some data. So it could be that you notice that your head is tired and actually what you need is a really good night's sleep. Or it could be that you notice that you're starting to get hungry and what you need to do is prioritise getting some food. It could be that actually you're noticing that you're tired and you need to get some more oxygen and you need to breathe. But whatever it might be, just notice in that moment. And the second step with that is then pausing. So when you notice that, often we'll react. So I can sometimes notice that I might be feeling uncomfortable about a certain situation, and my automatic response without me thinking unconsciously is I reach for my phone and start scrolling through social media, because it's a way of almost distracting myself from actually what I truly need. Or we might reach for food or wine or whatever it might be. So when we do this breathing with awareness, the next step is really pausing and listening deeper. So we're not just reacting, but we're truly responding to what the need is. So as part of this, I would encourage you to start to build the list of what your needs are. And once you've got that list, and it can be anything from actually what I need is a massage. And I think it's really important to stay here. Like I said earlier, that needs are unique. They can't be judged. They are just yours. For one person, a massage might be a need because they have back problems, and actually a monthly massage keeps them functioning and being okay. For somebody else, that massage might be a desire that actually, if I have it, it's great, but without it, I'm still okay. But I would encourage you to build that list. So it might be that you need some alone time. It might be that you need to meet with your friends once a month. It might be that you need a date night with your partner once a week. Whatever it might be, start to add to the list. And what you'll find is that you'll have needs that are daily. You might have needs that are weekly, and you might have needs that are monthly. So your daily needs will be probably your physical needs. So you'll need sleep every day, you'll need water every day or drink every day, you'll need food. And then some needs have kind of a less frequent. So the fourth step after you've brainstormed your needs is really to get more specific and define them. So it's not only what the need is, but how you're going to meet it and how often. So for example, it might be, I need 7 hours sleep every night. It might be, I need a night out with my girlfriends once a fortnight. It might be that actually I need 1 day a month to work on a new business plan that I want to get off the ground. So it's really thinking through and being really clear with yourself what it is, how you're going to meet it, and how often. So one of the things that I now have on my needs list is I have monthly reflexology, which kind of 7 years ago, before I had my son, would have felt like a completely self-indulgent, unnecessary thing to have. But I've learned that through my adrenal fatigue experience that actually monthly reflexology balances me out and keeps me functioning. And so I can now, without judgment or self-criticism, have that on my list, knowing that's just a need I've got. And so I'd encourage you, just notice what comes up when you start to put stuff on your list. Notice if your inner critic is starting to judge you, and just notice if you're thinking, oh, I don't really need that, and you're dismissing it. And that's just data. It's just data to acknowledge. And I go back to my point about remembering that we live in a society that doesn't encourage us to do this. So you might need to tolerate the discomfort of those feelings coming up just to start to acknowledge and get your needs met. And ultimately, this is about defining what rituals or kind of micro habits do you need to put into place to recognise and get your needs met. Glennon Doyle brilliantly puts in her Untamed book that I keep talking about, she talks about actually as selfless women. If that's the model of motherhood that society wants us to be selfless, to be great mothers, selfless women are actually very efficient for society because we kind of fit into the box, but it doesn't make for a beautiful, a true or a just society. And she really clearly puts, when women lose themselves, the world loses its way. And what we need right now are women who have detoxed themselves so completely from the world's expectations that they are full of nothing but themselves. And I love that quote, but actually it triggers a lot for me because, being full of ourselves, and, I don't know about you, but I was very much brought up to not be full of myself, and that was a real trait that wouldn't be admired. But it comes back to that point that if we aren't full up in our own cup, in our own bank account, we can't give and overflow generously. And as Dr. Oscar talks about in his book, the postnatal depletion cure, he's really clear on if mothers are well, families are well, and if families are well, society is well. And I think that's what we need to remind ourselves here. We deserve to get our needs met regardless. It doesn't need to be because we're then going to give, but often that perspective can help us to prioritize our needs. So I hope that that's been useful, and I hope that it sparks some ideas on your own needs. And just remember that when we do this for ourselves unconsciously, we're giving our children the permission to do the same. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, bye-bye. If you've enjoyed this episode of Wisdom for Working Mums, please share it on social media and with your friends and family. I'd love to connect with you too, so if you head over to wisdomforworkingmums.co.uk, you'll find a link on how to do this. And if you love the show and really want to support it, please go to iTunes, write a review and subscribe. You'll be helping another working mum find this resource too. Thanks so much for listening.